You've been doing something strange lately. Not strange in a way that anyone around you would notice. Not strange in a way that shows up in conversation or makes the people in your life ask questions. Strange in the way that happens underneath everything, in the quiet between one moment and the next, in the pause before you respond to something that used to trigger you instantly. You've been doing something that you don't have a name for yet, something that feels almost like a glitch in the person you thought you were. And part of you has been waiting for someone to point at it directly and say, yes, that is real, and it means something specific. So let me do that right now. There are two things you've been doing, two behaviors, two patterns of being that have emerged in you recently that are so unusual, so contrary to the way you used to move through the world, that if you had tried to predict them a year ago, you would have gotten it completely wrong. And here's what's remarkable about them. They don't look like progress from the outside. They don't look like winning. They don't look like the version of transformation that gets celebrated or talked about. One of them might even look like withdrawal. The other might look like you've lost something, some edge, some drive, some hunger that used to define you. But here's the truth that this video is going to unfold for you. Those two things you've been doing, those two bizarre, quiet, almost inexplicable shifts in your behavior are not signs of loss. They are not signs of breakdown. They are not evidence that something is going wrong. They are two of the most sophisticated things a human consciousness can do. They are the signature behaviors of a specific kind of transformation, one that quantum mechanics has a name for, one that the oldest wisdom traditions tracked across thousands of years, one that the most profound teachers in human history tried to describe and almost always got wrong because they described it from the outside instead of from the inside. You are living it from the inside right now. And by the time we reach the end of this together, you will not only understand what you've been doing and why, you will feel the difference between the version of you that started this video and the version of you that finishes it. Not because I'm going to tell you something that changes you, but because understanding the mechanics of what is already happening to you completes the circuit. Recognition is not passive, recognition is activation, so stay with me. We're going to go deep into this. Let's start with what you've actually been experiencing, because before we can understand the mechanics, we have to be honest about the texture of it. The felt quality of this shift is not what people expect transformation to feel like. When most people imagine becoming, they picture expansion. They picture a kind of brightness, a forward momentum, a sense of doors opening, and sometimes it is that. But the specific phase you're in right now, the phase that produced these two behaviors, doesn't feel like that. It feels more like a strange settling, like something that used to be loud in you has gone quieter, like a frequency that used to dominate your internal landscape has dropped in volume, not because you suppressed it, but because it genuinely lost its hold. You might have noticed it first in the way you respond to conflict, or in the way you respond to people who used to have enormous power to destabilize you. There's a moment, and you know the moment I'm talking about, where something that should have landed and pulled you under just didn't. Not because you were numb, not because you were disconnected, but because something in you had reorganized around a different center of gravity. And you felt that reorganization, you felt the strange lightness of it, and then almost immediately you felt confused by it, because the old you would have been activated. The old you would have been spinning, and this version of you just stood there, steady, almost curious, watching the thing that used to own you pass through without catching. That is the first bizarre thing you've been doing. And we're going to name it precisely, explain the quantum mechanics underneath it, and then you're going to understand why it's one of the most sophisticated things your consciousness has ever done. But first, let me take you somewhere. If this recognition is already starting to move through you, there's something I want to offer before we go further into the mechanics.
Have you spent years trying every surface fix? Therapy, mindset work, manifestation, habit redesign, and the same patterns keep coming back in different clothes. Every one of those tools is working on belief and behavior. The actual pattern was installed deeper than any of them can reach. Beneath the veil, a quantum map of reality's hidden layers walks through the full 5-layer descent. The surface reality you were handed, the layer where the pattern was actually installed, the physics underneath that, the ancient traditions that mapped the same thing thousands of years ago, and what you actually are at the bottom of all of it. This is the layer that therapy, mindset work, and manifestation could never reach. The longer you keep working the surface, the longer that deeper layer keeps generating the same life. So do this one tonight. It's waiting in the pinned comment below.
Now let's move into the story that lives at the heart of what we're exploring here. There is a story told in the oldest contemplative traditions, not in the way that stories get told to children with a beginning and a moral at the end, but in the way that stories get told to initiates, the ones who are already in the middle of the thing the story describes. It's told not to inform but to confirm. It's told so that the person hearing it can stop wondering if they're going crazy. There was a keeper of signals, that's what they were called in this tradition. Keeper of signals, their role was to sit at the edge of a great harbour and tend a lighthouse to make sure the light turned, to make sure the frequency of the beam was strong enough to cut through fog, through storm, through the particular darkness that settles on open water in the hours before dawn. The keeper's name was Elias. Elias had been doing this work for a long time, long enough that the rhythm of it had become the rhythm of his own breathing, long enough that he could feel in his body when the light was true and when it was drifting. And for most of his years at the lighthouse, Elias had understood his job as maintenance. Keep the light burning, keep the beam strong, watch for ships. Signal when danger came close, but one winter, something changed in the harbour. Ships began arriving that weren't on the charts, not dangerous ships, not hostile, just ships that moved differently, that didn't seem to be following the usual currents that appeared out of fogs that should have been empty. And these ships, when they came close enough for Elias to see them clearly, seemed to be looking not for the harbour, but for the lighthouse itself. Not for guidance toward land, for the frequency of the light. At first, Elias tried to manage this the way he'd managed everything else. He adjusted the beam. He checked the mechanism. He reported the anomaly to the harbour authority and waited for instructions. But the ships kept coming, and slowly, over weeks that felt like years, Elias began to understand something that the harbour authority couldn't tell him, because they hadn't seen what he'd seen. The light wasn't guiding these ships. The light was calling them. And the calling was happening not because of anything Elias was doing with the mechanism. It was happening because of something that had changed in the quality of his attention. Something in the way he was tending the light had shifted from maintenance to something else. something that didn't have a name in the harbor authorities' manual, something that the ships, navigating by frequencies that the authorities' instruments couldn't measure, were responding to directly. Elias stopped reporting the anomaly, not because he was hiding something, but because he understood, in a way that went deeper than language, that what was happening wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a recognition the ships weren't lost. They had found exactly what they were looking for, and so had he. Hold that image for a moment. The keeper who stops trying to manage the anomaly and starts understanding what the anomaly is actually showing him. Because here's the first bizarre thing you've been doing, and here's why it connects to Elias. You have been, without consciously deciding to, withdrawing your signal from certain frequencies. Let me be precise about what this means, because the precision matters. In quantum field theory, and I want to explain this carefully because the science here is not metaphor, it is the actual mechanism. Every quantum system exists in a state of superposition until it interacts with its environment. This is not a poetic way of saying something vague about potential. This is a specific, measurable, experimentally confirmed feature of how quantum systems behave. The state of the system is genuinely undetermined, not just unknown, but actually undetermined, until the interaction with the environment forces what physicists call decoherence. Decoherence is the process by which a quantum system loses its superposition and resolves into a specific classical state. The environment, meaning everything the system interacts with, is what collapses the possibilities into one actuality. Now here's the part that changes everything when you apply it to consciousness. The environment that collapses your possibilities is not just the physical world around you, it is the field of interactions you participate in, the conversations you enter, the conflicts you engage, the frequencies you respond to. Every time you respond to a signal, every time you engage with a frequency, you are allowing that frequency to participate in your decoherence. You are allowing it to be part of what collapses your possibilities into a specific state. And for most of your life, you have been doing this unconsciously, allowing the loudest signals in your environment to be the primary architects of your decoherence, allowing the most persistent frequencies, the most demanding, the most emotionally charged, to be the ones that collapse you into the version of yourself they require. The first bizarre thing you've been doing is that you have been quietly, and without fully understanding why, withdrawing your participation from certain frequencies. Not all frequencies, not in a blanket way, not in the way that looks like isolation or avoidance, in a very specific, almost surgical way. You have been noticing, with a new and remarkable precision, which interactions leave you more coherent and which interactions leave you scattered, which conversations expand your internal field and which ones compress it, which relationships seem to call forward the clearest version of you and which ones seem to require you to shrink into something smaller and louder and more reactive. And then, without a plan, without a theory, without anyone telling you to do this, you have been quietly, almost invisibly, reducing your engagement with the frequencies that scatter you. This is the first bizarre thing. And it is bizarre because from the outside it looks like nothing. It looks like someone getting quieter. It looks like someone becoming less available. Might look like withdrawal or detachment or even coldness. But from the inside, and you know this, from the inside it feels like something is clarifying, like a signal that used to be drowned in static is starting to come through clean. The quantum mechanics of this are precise. When you withdraw your participation from a frequency that has been contributing to your decoherence, you are not simply avoiding something, you are changing the environmental conditions of your own collapse. You are changing which interactions get to participate in determining your state. And this changes everything about what states become available to you. Think about it this way. Decoherence in quantum systems happens because quantum states are extraordinarily sensitive to environmental interaction. Even a single photon interacting with a quantum system is enough to collapse its superposition. The fragility of quantum coherence is what makes it so rare and so powerful when it's maintained. Systems that maintain coherence, that protect their quantum state from environmental decoherence, can do things that classical systems simply cannot. They can exist in multiple states simultaneously. They can exhibit interference effects that allow them to explore many paths at once. They can sustain entanglement across distances that should make correlation impossible. When you protect your internal coherence by withdrawing from frequencies that scatter it, you are not becoming less. You are becoming more available to states that require coherence to exist. You are making room for something that the noise was crowding out. Let that land for a moment. The withdrawal is not retreat, the quieting is not diminishment, the reduced reactivity is not numbness. It is the beginning of coherence. It is the first condition that has to be met before the second bizarre thing you've been doing becomes possible. Because the second thing requires the first. They are sequential. They are a mechanism with two parts. And most people who talk about transformation talk about the second part without understanding that the first part has to happen first and has to happen in this specific way for the second part to be real rather than performed. Let me explain what I mean by that. There is a kind of transformation that is performed. It looks like the real thing from the outside. It has all the right language. It makes all the right declarations. The person doing it can describe the shift in eloquent terms, can tell you what they've released and what they've stepped into, can articulate the mechanics of their becoming with impressive precision. But underneath the performance, the old frequencies are still running. The old decoherence patterns are still active. The person has learned a new way of talking about themselves without actually changing the environmental conditions of their collapse. And then there is the real thing. The real thing doesn't always have eloquent language. The real thing often looks quieter and less dramatic than the performed version. The real thing is characterized not by what the person is declaring, but by what the person is no longer being pulled by, not by what they've added to their identity, but by what has quietly stopped having the power to destabilize them. The first bizarre thing you've been doing is the real thing. And it has been creating the conditions for the second. So what is the second? Let me take you back to Elias for a moment, because the story isn't finished. After Elias stopped reporting the anomaly and started paying attention to what the anomaly was showing him, something began to happen in the quality of his tending. He had always maintained the lighthouse with care, with diligence, with the particular pride of someone who takes their work seriously. But now the tending changed in a way that he couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't that he worked harder, it wasn't that he improved his technique or upgraded his knowledge of lighthouse mechanics. It was something more interior than that, something that had to do with why he was tending the light. Before the ship started coming, Elias had tended the light because it was his job, because the harbor needed it, because ships would be lost without it. These were good reasons, true reasons, but they were reasons that pointed outward, toward function, toward utility, toward the needs of others. The light was a tool that Elias maintained in service of a purpose external to himself. After the ship started coming, something shifted in that relationship. Elias began to understand, not intellectually, but in his body, in the way that real understanding always lands first, that the light was not separate from him, that the quality of the beam was not just a function of the mechanism, but a function of his own internal state. That on the nights when he was most present, most coherent, most fully himself in the act of tending, the light had a quality that it didn't have on the nights when he was distracted or anxious or going through the motions. He couldn't prove this with the harbor authorities' instruments, but the ships knew. The ships that navigated by frequencies the instruments couldn't measure knew the difference between a light that was mechanically correct and a light that was coherently alive. And here is what Elias began to do that was so strange, so contrary to everything the harbor authorities' manual had prepared him for. He began to tend the light for the light itself, not for the ships, not for the harbor, not for his job or his pride or his sense of duty. He began to tend it because the act of tending, done from that place of complete presence and coherence, was itself the most alive he had ever felt. The light had stopped being a tool and had become something else. Something he was in relationship with rather than in charge of. Something that was as much tending him as he was tending it. And the ships, the strange ships that navigated by frequencies no instrument could measure, came more often. And they came from farther away. Now here is the second bizarre thing you've been doing. And here is why Elias matters. You have been creating without the old hunger. If this transmission is landing for you, if you can feel the mechanics of what we're describing clicking into place, take a moment to like the video and subscribe so more of this reaches you when you need it most. Now let's keep going. I want to be very precise about this because the difference between the old hunger and what has replaced it is the entire substance of this second shift. And it is easy to miss because from the outside they can look similar. Both produce action, both produce output, both involve you doing things, making things, building things, showing up for things. But the internal mechanics of them are completely different. And the difference in the internal mechanics produces a completely different quality of result and a completely different quality of experience in the doing. The old hunger was driven by lack. This is not a moral judgment, it is a mechanical description. The old hunger, the hunger that drove most of your creative and productive activity for most of your life, was powered by the felt experience of not yet being enough, not yet having enough, not yet being safe or seen or complete. The action it generated was real. The results it produced were sometimes remarkable, but the fuel was deficit. The engine ran on the energy of a gap, The gap between where you were and where you needed to be to finally feel okay. And here's the thing about deficit-driven action that almost no one talks about with real precision. When deficit is your fuel, every achievement is immediately metabolized by the hunger rather than satisfied by it. You reach the thing you were reaching for, and for a moment, sometimes a long moment, it feels like arrival. But then the hunger reconfigures, it finds the next gap. It identifies the next distance between here and enough. And the engine starts running again, not because you are broken or ungrateful or spiritually immature, because that is literally how deficit-driven motivation works. It is structurally incapable of satisfaction, because satisfaction would end the fuel supply. This is not a spiritual problem, this is a mechanics problem. And quantum mechanics, specifically the physics of coherent versus incoherent systems, gives us a precise way to understand why. An incoherent system, a system where the component parts are oscillating out of phase with each other, generates a lot of activity, a lot of noise, a lot of energy expenditure, but the energy goes in multiple directions simultaneously, and the directions interfere with each other, and the net result is less effective than the raw energy input would suggest. Incoherence is not the absence of activity. It is activity that partially cancels itself out. A coherent system, a system where the component parts are oscillating in phase, generates what physicists call constructive interference. The waves add to each other rather than cancelling each other. The result is an output that is disproportionately powerful relative to the energy input. Lasers work this way. Coherent light where all the photons are in phase, can cut through steel. The same photons, incoherent, scattered, produce nothing more than a diffuse glow. The old hunger produced incoherent action, not worthless action, not ineffective action, but action where a significant portion of the energy was consumed by the internal interference between the part of you that was reaching and the part of you that was afraid, between the part of you that wanted to succeed and the part of you that was certain you'd fail, between the part of you that was building and the part of you that was simultaneously defending against the possibility that the building wouldn't be enough. What you've been doing lately, the second bizarre thing, is creating from coherence. And it feels strange. It feels strange because it doesn't have the familiar urgency of the old hunger. It doesn't have the driven quality, the almost anxious forward momentum that you used to associate with productivity and ambition and getting things done. When you're creating from coherence, there's a quality of ease to it that can feel suspicious.
Like you're not working hard enough, like you're missing something. Like the absence of the old strain means the work doesn't matter as much or won't produce as much or isn't as serious. But here's what's actually happening. When you create from coherence, from the place where you are not running from lack, but moving from fullness, the internal interference drops. The part of you that's building and the part of you that's afraid stop cancelling each other out. The energy that used to be consumed by the internal conflict between your ambition and your fear becomes available for the actual work. And the work, as a result, carries a different quality, not a louder quality, not a more dramatic quality, cleaner quality, more coherent quality, a quality that, like Elias's light, can be felt by the things that navigate by frequencies no instrument can measure. This is why the second bizarre thing is connected to the first. You couldn't have gotten here without the first. The withdrawal from the frequencies that were scattering you, the quiet reduction in your participation in the interactions that were keeping you incoherent, that created the conditions in which coherent creation became possible. The first thing was the clearing. The second thing is what grows in cleared ground. Now I want to pause here because I want you to actually feel this rather than just understand it intellectually. There's a difference between comprehending a concept and having it land in your body. And this particular concept, the shift from deficit-driven action to coherence-driven creation, is one that needs to land in your body to be useful. So let's do this. Place your hand on your chest. Not symbolically, actually do it right now. Feel the warmth of your own hand against your sternum, feel the slight pressure of it. And then take a breath, not a performative breath, not a yoga breath, just a real breath, the kind your body wants to take when you give it permission. Now I want you to think about the last time you did something from the old hunger. Don't go to the most extreme version, go to something recent. A message you sent because you needed a response, a project you pushed on because you needed to prove something, an interaction you entered because you needed to be seen in a particular way. Hold that memory and notice what happens in your chest, under your hand, when you hold it. Notice the quality of the sensation. Is it tight? Is it forward-leaning? Is there a kind of bracing in it, a holding against something? Don't judge it, just notice it. Now let that go with your next exhale. And think about something recent that you did from the other place. It might be small. It might be something no one else would categorize as significant. But there was a moment recently, maybe in the last few weeks, where you did something, made something, said something, showed up for something from a place that didn't have that tightness in it, where the doing felt more like expression than like striving, where the outcome mattered, but the doing was already complete in itself. Hold that memory and notice what happens in your chest under your hand. Is it different? Is there more space in it? Is there a quality of warmth or expansion that wasn't there in the first memory? That difference, that physical, somatic, completely real difference in the quality of sensation in your body, that is not imagination. That is your nervous system registering the difference between coherent and incoherent states. That is your body telling you what your mind is still learning to articulate. The second bizarre thing you've been doing, creating from coherence, has a physical signature. And your body already knows it. Your body has been trying to tell you about it for weeks. Let that settle for a moment before we go deeper. I want to ask you something here, and I genuinely want to know. Drop it in the comments. Was there a specific moment when the old patterns suddenly lost their grip on you? A moment when something that used to pull you completely under just didn't? What was happening in your life when that shift first showed up? Because the patterns in those answers matter. And I read them because here's what I want to explore now. Here's the layer underneath these two behaviors that makes them more than just interesting psychological shifts. Here's what makes them, in the precise language of quantum mechanics and the oldest wisdom tradition simultaneously, the signature of a specific kind of transformation that has a name and a mechanism and a direction. In quantum mechanics, there is a concept called a phase transition. A phase transition is what happens when a system crosses a threshold and its properties change not gradually, but discontinuously. Water doesn't gradually become ice. At a specific temperature, under specific pressure conditions, it crosses a threshold and its entire organizational structure changes. The molecules that were moving freely suddenly lock into a crystalline lattice. The properties of the system change completely, not because the molecules themselves are different, but because the relationships between them have reorganized around a new pattern of coherence. Phase transitions are not gradual, they are threshold events. And the most important thing about them, the thing that almost never gets mentioned in the popular descriptions of this concept, is that the system often looks like nothing is happening right before the transition occurs. The temperature is dropping, the conditions are changing.
But the water is still water, still liquid, still moving. And then at the threshold, everything changes at once. What you have been experiencing, the gradual withdrawal from incoherent frequencies, the gradual emergence of coherent creation, these are not the transformation itself. These are the temperature dropping. These are the conditions changing. These are the system approaching the threshold. The two bizarre things you've been doing are the signature of a consciousness approaching a phase transition. And here's what that means practically, specifically, in terms of what you can expect. First, it means that the changes you've been experiencing are not random. They are not the result of a good week or a good practice or a good conversation. They are the result of a systematic change in the conditions of your internal field that has been building for longer than you know. The visible shifts, the reduced reactivity, the coherent creation, these are the surface expressions of a much deeper reorganization that has been happening at a level below your conscious awareness. You didn't decide to do these two things. They emerged from a process that was already underway. That is what makes them significant. Decided changes can be undecided. Emergent changes are the system itself moving. Second, it means that the discomfort you felt alongside these changes is not evidence that something is wrong. Phase transitions are not comfortable. The water molecules, if they could feel, would not experience the approach to freezing as pleasant. The reorganization of their relationships, the loss of the freedom of liquid movement, the locking into a new pattern, this involves the dissolution of the previous arrangement. And dissolution always has a felt quality of loss, even when what's coming is more structured, more coherent, more capable. What you've been letting go of, the frequencies you've been withdrawing from, the old hunger you've been releasing, these were not nothing. They were real, they had weight, they had history, they had identity attached to them. The person who was driven by that hunger, who was shaped by those frequencies, that person was real and had real value and accomplished real things. The dissolution of that arrangement is a real loss. Even if what's replacing it is more coherent, you are allowed to feel the weight of that. You are allowed to grieve the version of yourself that the old arrangement required you to be. But here's the truth that needs to be said clearly. Grieving the old arrangement is not the same as returning to it. You can feel the weight of what's dissolving and still let it dissolve. You can honor the version of yourself that was shaped by the old frequencies without going back to live in them. The grief is part of the transition, not an argument against it. Third, and this is the one that I want to spend real time on because it's the one most people miss, a phase transition changes what the system is capable of, not incrementally, discontinuously. Ice can do things water cannot. It can support weight, it can be carved, it can hold a shape, it can exist in forms that liquid water cannot sustain. The transition doesn't just change the properties of the system, it opens up a category of possibility that was structurally unavailable in the previous phase. The version of you that is emerging from this transition, the version that has withdrawn from incoherent frequencies and begun creating from coherence, that version is not just a better version of the old you. It is a different phase, and it has access to a category of possibility that the old phase could not sustain. I want to be specific about what that category of possibility looks like, because vague promises about what's on the other side of transformation are exactly the kind of thing that sounds inspiring in the moment and means nothing when you're in the difficulty of the actual process. So let me be precise. The old phase, the deficit-driven, incoherence-amplified phase, was capable of producing results, real results. But the mechanism of those results required constant fuel input. The hunger had to be maintained, the fear had to be kept active. The gap between here and enough had to remain open, because the moment it closed, the engine stopped. This meant that you could not afford to fully arrive anywhere. Full arrival would end the fuel. So the old phase had a structural ceiling built into it, a ceiling that felt like your personal limitation, but was actually the ceiling of the mechanism itself. The coherent phase does not have that ceiling, not because it's unlimited in some cosmic sense, but because it is not powered by deficit, it is powered by expression. And expression does not have a fuel problem. Expression is not depleted by arrival. Expression is renewed by it. When you create from the place where the creating is already complete in itself, reaching the result doesn't end the engine, it deepens it, it confirms the direction, it opens the next expression rather than closing the gap that was powering the previous one. This is the specific capability that the phase transition opens up. Not magic, not sudden, effortless success, but a fundamentally different relationship between your action and your motivation, one that is structurally capable of sustaining itself through arrival rather than being structurally dependent on never arriving. Let me take you somewhere else now, because there's a second story I want to tell you, and this one goes to the heart of what it means to be the kind of person this video is addressed to, the kind of person the title names. There is a particular kind of human being that shows up in every tradition, in every culture, in every era of recorded history. Not a superhuman, not a specially chosen one in the way that phrase usually gets used, with its implications of cosmic favoritism and predestined glory, but a specific functional type, a specific kind of consciousness that has a specific relationship to its own becoming. The oldest traditions called this person by different names. In some traditions, they were called the ones who remember, in others, the ones who turn, in others, the ones who carry the frequency forward. But across all the different names, the description is remarkably consistent. And the description does not begin with their gifts or their power or their achievements. It begins with their sensitivity. The person this video is addressed to has always been unusually sensitive to frequencies that other people don't notice. Not in a mystical sense, though the mystical traditions do describe it that way. In a very practical, very specific sense. You notice when a room's energy changes before you can identify why. You notice when something is off in a relationship before anything has been said. You notice when a situation that looks fine on the surface has a quality underneath it that contradicts the surface. You have always been, whether you called it this or not, someone who navigates by frequencies that most people's instruments don't register. And for most of your life, this sensitivity has been as much a burden as a gift, because you were sensitive to the incoherent frequencies as well as the coherent ones. You felt the discord as sharply as the harmony. You absorbed the anxiety of rooms you walked into. You took on the emotional weather of the people around you as if it were your own. Your sensitivity was not selective, it was total. And total sensitivity without the ability to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to the field around you is exhausting in a way that is very difficult to explain to people who don't experience it. The person this video is addressed to has often been told by well-meaning people who don't understand what they're describing that the sensitivity is the problem, that you need to be less affected, less open, less permeable, that the solution to the exhaustion of total sensitivity is to develop a kind of armor, a way of being less sensitive, less receptive, less tuned. That advice is precisely wrong. The sensitivity is not the problem. The lack of coherence is the problem. And the solution is not less sensitivity. It is more coherence. A tuning fork that is not coherent, that is vibrating in multiple frequencies simultaneously, will resonate with almost anything. It will pick up every frequency in its environment and amplify it without discrimination. But a tuning fork that is perfectly coherent, that is vibrating in a single clear frequency, will only resonate with what matches it. It doesn't become less sensitive, it becomes selectively sensitive. It becomes sensitive in a way that is organized around its own frequency rather than organized by whatever is loudest in the environment. The first bizarre thing you've been doing, the withdrawal from incoherent frequencies, is the beginning of coherence. It is your sensitivity beginning to organize itself around your own frequency rather than around the frequencies of your environment. And this is why it has felt like relief, even when it has also felt like loss. You are not becoming less sensitive, you are becoming coherently sensitive. And that is a completely different experience of the same fundamental capacity. Here's where I want to introduce the second character in this story. Her name is Mira. Mira had spent most of her adult life being described by the people who loved her as too much, too sensitive, too intense, too affected by things that other people seemed to move through without difficulty. She felt everything at full volume. Joy that was almost unbearable in its brightness. Grief that seemed to have no bottom. Anger that surprised her with its force. Connection that felt like it was happening at a cellular level, like she was genuinely merging with the people she loved. She had tried over the years to manage this. She had built structures around herself, routines that created predictability, relationships that were safe because they were bounded, work that engaged her mind without requiring her full presence. She had become, in the language of the people who knew her, more stable, more manageable, more functional. But there was a cost, and the cost was this: The structures she had built to manage her sensitivity had also managed out the thing that made her most alive. The muting of the discord had also muted the music. The armor that protected her from the frequencies that overwhelmed her had also insulated her from the frequencies that fed her. She was more stable, and she was less herself. The moment that changed everything for Mira did not look like a revelation. It looked like a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. She was sitting in a garden, not her garden, a garden she was passing through on the way to somewhere else, and she stopped. Not because something dramatic happened, because something quiet happened, a quality of light through new leaves, a smell of soil after rain, a bird making a sound that was so precisely itself, so completely without performance or intention, that it landed in Mira's chest like a key turning in a lock. And she felt, for the first time in years, the full volume of herself without the overwhelm. Not because the volume had decreased, because something in her had reorganized around a center that could hold it. The sensitivity was still total, but it was no longer scattered. It was no longer picking up every frequency with equal amplification. In that moment, in that garden on that Tuesday, Mira's sensitivity was organized around something so clear and so precisely itself that the incoherent frequencies of the environment simply didn't find purchase in it. She stood there for a long time, long enough that she was late for wherever she had been going, and she didn't care, because she understood, in the way that the body understands things before the mind has words for them, that this was not a mood, this was not a good moment in an otherwise difficult life. This was a demonstration, her own system showing her what coherence felt like from the inside. She went home that afternoon and did something that she had not done in years. She made something, not for anyone, not for a purpose, not because it would be useful or valued or even seen. She made something because the making was the most precise expression of the frequency that had just clarified in her. And the making felt like the garden, like the bird, like the light through leaves, completely itself, completely without performance. That was Mira's second bizarre thing. And you recognize it, don't you? Not because you had the same Tuesday in the same garden, but because you've had your version of it. Maybe not as clean as Mira's, maybe not as sudden, but there has been a moment or a series of moments recently where you felt the coherence from the inside, where you felt the difference between the scattered version of your sensitivity and the organized version, where the making or the being or the showing up had that quality of the bird's sound, completely itself, completely without performance. That wasn't imagination, that was your system showing you what's possible in the coherent phase. Tell me in the comments, and have you had a moment like Mira's garden? A moment where something quiet and completely ordinary cracked you open into a quality of presence you hadn't felt in years? What was it? Where were you? I want to know what those threshold moments look like for people in this field, because they matter more than we usually let ourselves say. Now, I want to go deeper into the mechanics of why these two behaviors, the withdrawal and the coherent creation, tend to emerge together and in sequence. Because understanding this sequence is what will help you navigate the part of the process that comes next, which is the part that most people find the most disorienting. In physics, when a system is approaching a phase transition, there is a phenomenon called critical slowing down. As the system gets closer to the threshold, it becomes increasingly slow to return to its previous state after a perturbation. If you push the water that is approaching freezing, it takes longer and longer to return to its liquid equilibrium. The system is losing its attachment to its previous phase. It is becoming, in a very precise technical sense, less stable in its old configuration, not because it is breaking down, but because it is in the process of reorganizing around a new configuration. Critical slowing down is the physics of the in-between, and the in-between is where you are right now. The disorientation you've been feeling, the sense that the old responses are taking longer to come back, the sense that you've lost some of the automatic reactivity that used to characterize you, the sense that you're moving more slowly through situations that used to move quickly, that is critical slowing down. That is your system losing its attachment to its previous phase configuration. That is not breakdown. That is the physics of transition. And here's the specific implication of this for how you navigate the next period. Critical slowing down means that you are more sensitive to perturbations right now than you will be once the transition completes. You are in a state of increased sensitivity to the environmental conditions that will influence which phase you transition into. The frequencies you expose yourself to during this period matter more than they did before. The interactions you participate in during this period have more influence over your decoherence pattern than they would have had a year ago. The things you create, the ways you spend your attention, the relationships you invest in, these are all participating in the determination of what the new configuration looks like. This is why the first bizarre thing, the withdrawal from incoherent frequencies, is not just a preference or a mood, it is a navigational intelligence. Your system, approaching a phase transition, is doing exactly what a system in critical slowing down should do. It is reducing its exposure to the frequencies that would push it back toward its previous configuration. It is protecting the conditions that the new configuration requires. It is not running away. It is orienting. The intelligence behind this is not conscious in the way that deliberate decisions are conscious. It is the intelligence of the system itself, the intelligence of a consciousness that knows at a level deeper than language what it is becoming and what that becoming requires. You didn't think your way to these two behaviors. You were moved to them by something that understood the mechanics before you did. And now you understand the mechanics. And that changes something, because here's the thing about understanding the mechanics of your own transformation. It doesn't make the transformation happen faster or more smoothly. It doesn't remove the difficulty or the disorientation or the grief of what's dissolving, but it changes your relationship to all of those things. When you understand that the critical slowing down is a feature of the transition rather than a sign of dysfunction, you stop fighting it. When you understand that the withdrawal is navigational intelligence rather than avoidance, you stop apologizing for it. When you understand that the coherent creation is the first expression of a new phase rather than a temporary good mood, you stop waiting for it to end. Understanding the mechanics transforms your relationship to the process. And your relationship to the process is itself a variable in how the process unfolds. This is the observer effect applied to your own becoming. The observer effect in quantum mechanics is the principle that the act of observation changes the state of the observed system. This is not a metaphor for the power of positive thinking. It is a specific, experimentally confirmed phenomenon in which the interaction between a measuring device and a quantum system necessarily changes the quantum state of the system. You cannot observe a quantum system without participating in its decoherence. The observation is not passive, it is an interaction that has consequences. When you observe your own transformation with understanding rather than fear, with recognition rather than resistance, you are changing the conditions of your own decoherence. You are participating in the determination of which states become available to you. The observation is not separate from the process. It is part of the process. And the quality of the observation, whether it is frightened or grounded, whether it is resistant or receptive, whether it is confused or comprehending, that quality is a real variable in how the process unfolds. This is not a call to force positivity or to perform acceptance of things you genuinely find difficult. That would be incoherent in the precise technical sense. Performed acceptance is not coherent, it is the surface layer saying one thing while the deeper layers say another. That is internal interference. That is the incoherence that reduces the power of your output. Real acceptance, the kind that is coherent, is not performed. It is arrived at through understanding. You don't force yourself to accept the discomfort of transition. You come to understand the discomfort of transition precisely enough that the acceptance arises naturally from the understanding. You can't force water to become ice, but you can create the conditions in which ice becomes the natural next state. This video, this transmission, is part of creating those conditions. Let me offer you a practice now. A second one, different from the first, matched to this specific moment in the understanding. I want you to think about one specific interaction, one specific frequency, one specific relationship or situation or pattern that you have been quietly withdrawing from. Not the most dramatic one, not the one with the most story attached to it. The one that is most representative of the first bizarre thing. The one where the withdrawal has been clearest, most consistent, most undeniable. Hold it in your awareness. Don't analyze it. Don't justify it. Don't explain it to yourself. Just hold it. Now I want you to feel in your body what the withdrawal from that frequency has created, not what you've lost by withdrawing. What has been created by the withdrawal, the space, the quiet, the particular quality of internal field that exists now in the place where that frequency used to be. Feel the shape of that space. Feel the temperature of it. Is it cooler, warmer, larger than you expected? That space is not empty. That space is the condition. That space is the cleared ground in which the coherent creation grows. That space is the silence that the new signal needs in order to be heard. You created that space, not by deciding to, by following the navigational intelligence of a system that knew what it was approaching. Say this, either out loud or internally, with the full weight of what you've just understood. I am not withdrawing from life. I am creating the conditions for a different quality of life. I am not becoming less. I am becoming coherent. Say it again. And feel what happens in your body when you say it from understanding rather than aspiration. When it's not something you're trying to believe, but something you actually know. That's different, isn't it? That's the difference between a declaration and a recognition. Now, I want to address something that I know is present for some of you, because I would be doing this transmission a disservice if I didn't. There is a version of this material that can be used as spiritual bypass, a way of using the language of coherence and phase transitions and navigational intelligence to avoid things that actually need to be engaged. A way of calling avoidance a withdrawal, calling dissociation a phase transition, calling numbness coherence. And the distinction between the real thing and the bypass version is important enough that I want to spend real time on it. The real withdrawal, the first bizarre thing, has a specific quality that distinguishes it from avoidance. The real withdrawal is discriminating. It is not blanket. It is not a general retreat from the world or from difficulty or from the demands of relationship and responsibility. It is specific. It is surgical. It withdraws from the frequencies that are genuinely incoherent, genuinely scattering, genuinely contributing to the interference that reduces your capacity. It does not withdraw from challenge. It does not withdraw from depth. It does not withdraw from the kind of difficulty that is itself part of becoming. Avoidance is not discriminating. Avoidance withdraws from discomfort in general. Avoidance retreats from anything that asks something of you that you're not sure you can give. Avoidance calls itself coherence, but actually produces more incoherence because the things being avoided continue to generate internal interference, even when they're not being directly engaged. You can feel the difference in your body. The real withdrawal produces the space I asked you to feel a moment ago, the warm, quiet, generative space. Avoidance produces a different sensation, a kind of tightness, a kind of vigilance, a quality of being braced against something rather than cleared of something. If what you're doing is the real thing, you know it, because the space it creates has that quality. Because the things you've withdrawn from have genuinely lost their pull rather than being held at arm's length by effort. Because the withdrawal has been accompanied by the coherent creation rather than by more paralysis. If what you're doing is avoidance, you also know it, because the tightness is still there. Because the things you're avoiding are still generating internal noise even when you're not engaging them. Because the withdrawal has not produced space. It has produced a kind of pressurized quiet that is waiting to break. I'm not saying this to introduce doubt. I'm saying it because the people who are doing the real thing need to be able to recognize it clearly enough to trust it. And the people who are doing the bypass version need to be able to recognize it clearly enough to change course. Both recognitions require honesty, and honesty is itself a coherence practice. Let me bring Elias back one more time, because there's a final movement in his story that I haven't told you yet. After the ships began coming regularly, after Elias had reorganized his relationship to the light from maintenance to something more like communion, there came a night when the storm was the worst he had ever seen. Not a dramatic Hollywood storm with lightning and crashing waves, though there was some of that, but a storm of a particular quality, a sustained, relentless, grinding quality that tested not courage but endurance. The kind of storm that doesn't ask for a single heroic act, but for hours and hours of simply remaining present. The harbor authority had sent word that the conditions were too dangerous for ships to be out, that the light could be reduced to minimal function, that Elias could shelter and wait for morning. And for a long time, Elias considered this, because the storm was genuinely difficult. and the reduced function would have been genuinely reasonable. But he didn't reduce the function, not out of defiance or pride or the old hunger for recognition. He kept the light at full coherence because in the middle of the worst of the storm, he felt something, a quality of attention from somewhere out on the water, not a ship he could see, not a signal he could measure, but a frequency, the kind that the ships that navigated by unmeasurable frequencies would emit when they were in the most need of the most coherent signal. He kept the light burning at full coherence through the whole of that night. And in the morning, when the storm broke, there was a ship in the harbor that hadn't been there the night before, a ship that shouldn't have been able to navigate those waters in that storm by any conventional means, a ship that, when its crew came ashore, seemed less surprised to have arrived than grateful, as if they had known the frequency would be there, as if they had navigated toward it specifically, trusting it to hold through the storm because they had learned that this particular light held through storms. The harbor authority asked Elias how the ship had made it in. He didn't have an answer that would fit in their report, so he said what he could say in their language. The light was maintained at full function throughout the night. What he didn't say, because it wouldn't have fit in any report, was what he understood about that night. That the storm was not an interruption of the tending. The storm was the point of the tending. The coherence that he had been building for months, the reorganization of his relationship to the light from maintenance to something more alive. That coherence was not for the easy nights, it was for the storm. It was specifically for the moment when the conditions made conventional navigation impossible, and the only thing that could be followed was a signal that was coherent enough to cut through everything else. And you are both Elias and the ship in this story. Part of you is the keeper, the part that has been, through these two bizarre behaviors, building coherence, withdrawing from the frequencies that scatter the signal, creating from the place where the creating is already complete, building without knowing you were building it, a quality of internal frequency that is not for the easy conditions, that is for the storm. And part of you is the ship, the part that has been navigating by frequencies that no one else's instruments can measure, the part that has been moving towards something that you can feel more clearly than you can describe, the part that is out on the water in the conditions that conventional navigation says are too difficult, following the signal of your own becoming toward a harbor that is real even if you can't see it yet. The coherence you've been building is not for display. It is for navigation. It is for the moment when the conditions are the hardest and the conventional maps are useless, and the only thing that can guide you is the quality of your own internal signal. And here's what I want you to understand about that. The coherence is already there. Not fully, not completely. The phase transition is not complete. You are still in the in-between. But the coherence is real and it is building, and the two bizarre things you've been doing are the evidence of it. Not evidence you have to take on faith. Evidence you can feel in your body. Evidence you demonstrated to yourself in the practice a few minutes ago when you felt the difference between the tight, braced quality of the deficit-driven state and the warm, spacious quality of the coherent state. You already know the difference. Your body already knows the difference. The understanding you've been building in this transmission is not creating something new. It is giving language to something that was already present. And that language, that precise understanding of the mechanics, is itself a coherence practice, because confusion is incoherent. Understanding is coherent, and every movement from confusion to understanding is a movement toward the phase you're becoming. Let me offer you one final practice before we move toward the close of this transmission. I want you to do something specific. I want you to think about the second bizarre thing, the coherent creation, the thing you've been making or doing or expressing from the place that doesn't have the old hunger in it. And I want you to identify one specific next step in that creation, not a plan, not a strategy, one specific next step. The thing that is already there, already clear, already asking to be done, that you've been perhaps hesitating to do because it doesn't have the urgency of the old hunger behind it. And so it feels less real, less important, less pressing. Feel that next step in your body. Feel where it lives. Is it in your chest, your hands, your throat? Where does the coherent creation ask to move through you? Now, I want you to say this out loud, because declaration is a coherence practice. It is the act of bringing the internal into the external, of collapsing the quantum possibility into a specific classical actuality through the act of naming it. Say this: I am creating from coherence. I am not waiting for urgency. I am following the signal that is already clear. Say it again, and feel the difference between saying it as an aspiration and saying it as a recognition, because it is a recognition. You have already been doing this. You have already been following the signal. The declaration is not a beginning, it is a confirmation. Now let me bring this transmission toward its completion, not by summarizing what we've covered, because you don't need a summary, you need a threshold, but by naming what has changed in you between the beginning of this video and this moment. You came in with two behaviors that you couldn't fully name, two things you'd been doing that felt strange, that didn't fit the old map of who you were and how you moved through the world. And you might have been, before this video, carrying a quiet uncertainty about them, a question underneath the experience. Is this right? Is this progress? Is this what it's supposed to feel like? You now have the mechanics. You know that the first bizarre thing, the withdrawal from incoherent frequencies, is the beginning of coherence. That it is not retreat, but orientation. That it is the navigational intelligence of a system approaching a phase transition, reducing its exposure to the frequencies that would push it back toward its previous configuration. You know that this is what it looks like when a consciousness stops being organized by the loudest signal in its environment and starts being organized by its own frequency. You know that the second bizarre thing, the coherent creation, is the first expression of the new phase, that it is powered by expression rather than deficit, that it does not have the urgency of the old hunger because it does not need lack as its fuel, that it produces constructive interference rather than internal cancellation, that it carries a quality like Elias's light that can be felt by the things that navigate by frequencies no instrument can measure. You know that these two things are sequential and connected, that the first creates the conditions for the second, that together they are the signature of a phase transition, a discontinuous reorganization of your internal field around a new pattern of coherence. And you know that you are in the in-between, in the critical slowing down, in the phase where the old configuration is losing its hold and the new configuration is not yet fully stable. And you know that this is not dysfunction. This is the physics of becoming. But here's the thing I want to leave you with. The thing that is not mechanics, but is also not less true than the mechanics. The two bizarre things you've been doing are not things you decided to do. They emerged from you, from something in you that understood what was happening before you had the words for it, from the navigational intelligence of a consciousness that knows what it is becoming and is already moving toward it. That intelligence is not external to you. It is not coming from somewhere else. It is not guidance from outside. It is you, the deepest, most coherent version of you, the version that is not organized by the loudest frequencies in your environment, but by the frequency that is most precisely itself. That version has been at work in you for longer than you know. These two behaviors are its signature. They are how it shows up in the world. They are how you can recognize it operating. And recognizing it is not passive. Recognizing it is activation. Every time you feel the difference between the coherent state and the incoherent state and choose consciously to orient toward coherence, you are participating in your own phase transition. You are being the observer that changes the observed system. You are the active variable in your own becoming. You are not a passive recipient of a transformation that is happening to you. You are the transformation itself, recognizing itself, naming itself, moving toward its own completion with the particular kind of intelligence that only coherence makes possible. The ships are coming, not because you advertised your location, not because you performed your frequency, because the light is real, because the coherence is building, because something in you has been tending the signal through the noise and the static and the storm, doing the two bizarre things that no one else would notice and that change everything. You are the keeper and the ship. You are the frequency and the field. You are the one who withdrew from the noise and began creating from the quiet, and in doing so became the signal that navigates by. This is not the end of the becoming. The phase transition is not complete. The in-between is still the in-between, but you are not confused about it anymore. And that clarity, that precise, grounded, mechanics deep clarity about what is happening in you and why, that is itself a movement toward the threshold. The threshold is not a destination, it is a quality of presence. It is what it feels like when the internal coherence is strong enough that the incoherent frequencies of the environment stop finding purchase. When the light is bright enough that it cuts through the storm. When the signal is clear enough that the ships that navigate by unmeasurable frequencies can find it from the open water. You are approaching that quality. You have been approaching it for longer than you know. The two bizarre things you've been doing are the evidence. Let that land. Feel what happens in your body when you let that fully land. When you stop holding it at a slight distance and let it actually arrive. The recognition that what you've been doing is not strange, it is not wrong. It is not a sign that something is off or missing or incomplete. It is the signature of coherence building. It is the physics of transformation working exactly as it should. You are ready, not because something external changed, because something internal reorganized, because the temperature dropped and the conditions shifted and the system is approaching the threshold that changes what is possible. You are the point where everything shifts, and you have been doing the two most important things a consciousness can do on the way to that threshold. You've been clearing the field, and you've been learning to create from the frequency that the clearing revealed. Welcome to what you've always been becoming. If this transmission reached you at the right moment, consider coming back to it. Watch it again before sleep, or in a moment of stillness when the noise starts closing in and you need to find the signal again. And if someone in your life is doing these two things without having the language for them, send this to them, not to teach them something, but because recognition is a gift. Passing this forward activates a remembrance in someone whose field is ready to receive it, and in the act of passing it, you reinforce your own understanding and add one more coherent signal to a field that benefits everyone who arrives here. Now, before you close this out, I want to ask you something specific, not a general reflection, but a precise question that belongs to this particular transmission. In the comments, I want you to tell me this. Which of the two bizarre things has been more present for you recently? The withdrawal, the first one, the quiet pulling back from frequencies that used to have your full engagement, or the coherent creation, the second one, the making or being or showing up that doesn't have the old urgency in it but has that different quality? Because here's why that question matters. The answer tells you where you are in the sequence. If the withdrawal is more present, you are in the clearing phase, you are in the preparation, and the coherent creation is coming. If the coherent creation is more present, you have crossed a threshold you may not have consciously registered, and the clearing that made it possible is already behind you. Either way, you are in the process. Either way, the mechanics are working. Either way, the light is building. Type the number 1 for the withdrawal, 2 for the coherent creation, or type both if both are present, because they often are in different areas of life at different intensities on different timelines. Your answer is not just information for me. It is a declaration for you. It is the act of naming where you are, which is itself a coherence practice, which is itself one more movement toward the threshold. If this transmission found you, it found you for a reason.
Not a cosmic reason that requires belief. A practical reason. You were already in the process. This was the signal that met the frequency you were already broadcasting. That's not magic. That's resonance. And resonance is not passive. It is the active recognition of coherence by coherence. Share this with the person in your life who is also doing these two things and doesn't have the language for them yet. Not because they need to be fixed or guided or saved, but because recognition is a gift. Because someone naming what you're going through precisely and without judgment is one of the most powerful things one human being can offer another. Because coherence recognizes coherence and calls it forward. You are the point where everything shifts, and the shifting is already underway.